So I'm a really big fan of Procreate, and have for quite some time now done all my game art in Procreate, including animations. But for the game I'm making at the moment, I'm using Moho 14 for all my animations. And that is for a good reason. If you have ever had to animate a character, you would know the amount of time that goes into making an animation. Not only is it difficult, but it just physically requires a lot of drawing. This is in part why it's extremely common to see rigged animations in games. If your character consists of separate sprite images that you move around like bones, then you don't have to redraw anything. You just have to move stuff around. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of the rigged look. Even when it's executed well, I feel that there's a certain rigidity to it. If you're like me, I want to make the case for the fact that you might actually like Moho. I bought this last Black Friday for about $240, so I'm still a bit of a beginner. But if you look at this character and how it runs around, or you look at any of these small animations, you can see that it doesn't look like it's rigged, even though it is. This means I get the benefit of a rigged animation without the look of a rigged animation. I mean, we can actually compare the early stages of my character and then compare it to the current version. And funnily enough, this old version looks rigged, even though it's frame by frame animated in Procreate. And the current version looks frame by frame animated, even though it is rigged in Moho. So for starters, Moho is a vector program. So this character was originally traced on top of my Procreate drawing with a mouse. Yeah, I drew this with a mouse. I also drew this with a mouse and this. And I think the fact that this entire look is done using vectors is one of Moho's best selling points. So not only can you do normal rigging stuff, like moving an arm or a leg using the bone, but you can also set up bones that have significantly more control, like a bone that affects head tilting. And this head tilting is done so that when you set up the bone, you make a keyframe for the head looking exactly like this, and then you move the bone to the other end, and now you go back in and literally move around stuff like move the eye, move the red scar thing, move the lines in the beak, and you deform any necessary part, and now in your main animation, you can rotate your head basically. Now I did spend a lot of time setting this up, using lots of tutorials. So now I can rotate the head, move the head, squish the head, move the thigh in a nice and convincing way, all using bones. But for a great deal of this look, I'm actually going one step further and changing each individual vector line using keyframes. So we can see for this landing animation that there are some keyframes for the bones, but if we go into each individual layer, we can see that I've actually set one keyframe for the start frame and one for the end frame for every single one of these brush layers. And to get a sense for what's happening when we do this, we can make a keyframe for the eye. If I make the eye look exactly like it does now for the first frame, but for this middle frame, we move the eye over here. And then we move the eye back for the last frame. And now when we play our animation, now we can see that not only is the eye at these positions for these individual frames, but the in-between positions are also interpolated so we don't have to work on them. We don't have to touch them. But if you take a look at the head, we can see that they have a separate ball for the shape of the head and a separate layer for the line art. But I can go in and just move these individual vector points to a wonky place, and now everything else will stay the same, except for this cheek that gets deformed. And if I don't like this, I can just go in and delete these keyframes. How Moho would structure it is you kind of draw on the 0th frame. And then for the rest of the keyframes you don't draw. You kind of just move your bones around and move the vector lines around in whatever way you want them. So you aren't supposed to draw anything in your actual animation, but if you want to, you can. But even more than that, you can get the same effect even if you don't. Because Moho actually also has frame by frame animation. For the original design of my character, we can see that this hair on the top kind of flaps. And this is not something that translates well to rigging. So what I did was I drew 5 different flaps, and now in my flap folder, I switch which flap is active depending on the frame. Now because it's frame by frame animation, interpolation doesn't work anymore, but it's still fine. I only need to draw this flap 6 times and only draw it once. Then for every other single animation I'm doing, I just use the switch flapping folder. But this is far from every feature in Moho. If you look at this bubble I made here, and we can see that it looks pretty nice. And if we look at how it looks in my drawing software, we can see that much like my character, it has a fairly painterly look. And that's because Moho has a lot of nice vector brushes. So for the most part, I've just drawn this character once. And ever since I finished it, most animations have taken me less than 15 minutes to create. Now some animations I think ended up kind of how I wanted them. Others not so much. But I think that's more of a skill issue. What I really like is the fact that I kind of have a base for every single animation. And I don't have to draw every single frame. I mostly just have to keyframe the start point and the end point. And what this means is that I can play around with my animations significantly more. You might have seen the animation for my Kyoto jump before. It doesn't look quite how I would like it just yet. But you can see two things. First of all, I kind of duplicated the tail in order to get this feathered silhouette. And then I rotated it in its entirety. And then second of all, we can see that I actually drew this wobbly little line below the character. And we can see that I'm moving around the wobbly lines during the animation. But more than that, I'm also altering the line weight. So in the first frame, the thickness of the line is 0. And then on the fourth frame, it's the thickest. And then it goes back to 0. And so we get this kind of poof effect. Now, I don't think I executed that well on the effect as it stands. I think I spent 2 minutes on it. But you can see that the idea of it kind of works. We can see the same for this branch thing, where if you walk close to it, you grab a hold of it, sort of prepping for a leap. Now if we look at it in Moho, we can see that it's the same character. I haven't really redrawn anything. If we look at the 0th frame, we can see it's just the same normal character. But then in front of the character, I just kind of redrew this branch and made it look as if the character is holding the branch. And then, other than keyframing some movements of these fake hands, the only other movement on this branch is just altering the thickness of each brushstroke. And it kind of looks like we have animated some movement, even though all I did was alter the brush thickness. Now, do I have anything negative to say about this program? Well, kind of. I think there are parts of this program that is quite confusing. I'm not sure it's fair to say that this has a steep learning curve, because I did manage to make almost all of these animations within the span of 2 weeks. But I will say that those 2 weeks were a pain. And I still feel like I barely understand this program. I barely understand what I'm doing. And I actually can't quite remember what I had to do to get it all working. But it does work. I know that the first 2 hours of opening this program, I couldn't even figure out how to change colors of my paint or change the brush texture. They have this weird styling thing going on up in the corner. And if you touch it, it breaks things, kind of. On top of all of this, even though there are some really good tutorials, I don't think there are that many of them. I think almost all my knowledge come from Moho's own YouTube videos and this video by the capable artist. All of this to say, I had a small moment where I asked my wife if she thought I should give up on Moho for this project. Which should tell you that I don't think it's a seamless experience. I'm really happy I stuck with it though, and I think once you do have your character rigged and have figured out how to do it, it becomes quite reusable and nice. It's still obviously not for every type of game. I guess if you want to equip a lot of different weapons and style like in Brotato, then perhaps rigging an engine is probably still the better approach. Because as you can see, since I'm doing so much deforming and stuff in the software itself, I'm exporting this as if it was a frame-by-frame animation. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them down below. Thanks for watching. Bye.